Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Beyond the Alert. Today, I'm speaking with Joe Albers, Director of Information of Security Operations for Element Solutions, Inc. Joe, thanks for chatting with me today.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
With a little bit of chatter before we hit record, I have to ask you, how the heck did you get into this space and how did you get your first role in security?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I've got a really interesting way of getting into security. I was into firewalls and networking, had been building cryptocurrency mining facilities, and ransomware became a thing because now you could transfer money with Bitcoin and all sorts of other stuff. So I really got into the side of actually helping with the ransomware events. So basically, I was able to get millions of dollars in Bitcoin because I had those relationships. And so I played kind of that role, and that really led me into getting a role as, oh, by the way, you did all this, networking, this, like, why don't you do firewalls? So I went into a company to do firewall work. A couple days before I started, they got completely ransomware, shutting down the entire company for, I think it was 2 weeks, about a $22 million breach. And so when I got there, their security guys said, I'm out. And they looked at me and said, can you do something, or can you help us? And I said, I've not done this, but I think I can fly this thing. And I was put in charge of security for a 4,000 person company, the first time really in a security role. No pressure. Fortunately, I swam to the top and, learned a lot. It was great getting a lot of visibility into an environment that hadn't been well protected over the years, to really see how bad things can get. And so it's pretty interesting because we've got write-ups and blogs from like different incident response teams and everything else. So it's kind of interesting to be involved in that piece, and then really kind of using that and leveraging it to get over to more consulting work, where basically I like to say, if a billionaire has a data breach, they don't call Geek Squad, they call their banker. And because the reason is these guys all have basically handlers at the bank, and they're like, okay, I've got a list of everybody for everything. And so they don't call the D Squad, they call the bankers, and then they call somebody like me who has the contract to go remediate the billionaire's security problem.
Interesting. I didn't know that's a thing. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a really niche thing, but it's a really cool thing, and it's stuff you'll do for people from different professional sports, from team owners to team managers to the players themselves to some of the richest people in the world, and it's really it's a fun space to be in.
I hope you get some autographs while you're doing that work.
Yeah, there's a lot of discretion that has to be involved with that. So, I did have the best sushi though ever with a client.
Where did you go?
I was literally working at their house to remediate an issue, and what ended up happening was they had one of the finest sushi chefs in the world coming over, and they're like, "You absolutely have to eat." And I kept denying it, denying it, denying it, and they're like, "No, like this is the best stuff in the world. Like you got to eat." So I tried it, and it was it was an interesting experience because a high pressure situation. But they're like, "Oh, hey, like keep like have some sushi," and
Not a worry in the world because you have it covered.
yeah. So it kind of ruined me in a lot of ways from being able to eat sushi other places, because I've had that level now, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's kind of you know the crazy space, and then basically from there I needed to be home more. And so I switched over to a more corporate role of, you know, managing different security teams. And so now I've gone from manager at one company to director at the next, and continue to build my teams bigger and more complex situations.
Awesome. So going from kind of the celebrity worlds and breaches to jumping into ransomware attack and making one heck of a grand entrance, you've kind of skipped the relationship building, report building with the other executives and rest of the security team, right? So obviously it's crunch time. You're in this emergency mode. What do you do to skip those steps to get that buy-in because you just showed up, right? And they're saying, "Hey, can you help?"
It was kind of more or less people just knowing about me. It was less about me doing those exact roles, but it's like, okay, like, you know, we know that you do this crazy, like you built Bitcoin mining facilities, some of the largest in the US. And really, we know that you know networking, you would firewall, we know you know this. Like, can you help us with that? Because it turns out running thousands of computers in a really small space and figuring out cooling power and networking is actually a skill set. And so I didn't realize what the value was. And then people started approaching me around it. And so it really went from okay, I'm doing my personal stuff to and doing it as a business to, oh, I really like the security side of the house. And so I've just stayed with security ever since.
Awesome. So for all those people out there studying and doing something completely different afterwards with student loans, rest assured, it's usually a chance meets opportunity kind of scenario, right? With where you end up.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing too is like, you never know when the opportunity is going to come. And sometimes you just have to jump at it when it's there. And, it's a lot of grinding a lot of times, but then it's like, okay, now I've got this skill set. Maybe you're taking a job that it has a bunch of tools that you want to learn and that you feel is necessary to learn. It may not pay as much as a different job, but your scope is narrower. So for me, like one of the biggest steps was the last role that I took. I went to a company where we were going to be well funded and I could build the security stack the way I wanted. And so I was able to do best in breed across all of the tool sets. And then we were able to manage it with only two people. And so, you can either spend the money on the people or the tool sets. If you spend the money on the tool sets, because the business modeling, sometimes you go that route. So it gets so you can look at it and go, okay, cool. I could have taken a role that paid more, but I wouldn't have got the experience I had. And now I got to build out an entire security stack with all the tools that I wanted, the way I wanted it, and got to live it and train other people in it.
In an efficient manner, right? Because it's just you, one other person, you have to build it the right way.
Yeah, there's not a lot of error when there's only two people to handle any security incident. So you tend to start using a lot more automation, a lot more if this happens, do this. And so I've really worked on simplifying like workflows and kind of making it as easy as possible for people to be able to follow it, which, now that I'm at my new team, that's really, I simplify it down. Hey, in this situation, do this, the automation is going to do that. But I always make it fail into a safe manner. And so that's really what I focus on is okay, if something happens, I want certain things that we know that are very low false positive, I want to absolutely take action on because it's high impact. And, there's all sorts of different ways to do that. And so, you know, we really focus on getting that automation there because, I'm now like on a 6-person team and, we're worldwide now. So we're follow the sun 6-person team. So you still have to have those procedures, you still have to have the technology in place and really make that more efficient. And the more efficient you make your tool set, the more time you have to threat hunt, the more time you have to improve your tool set. And sometimes you have to make that conscious sacrifice up front of saying, hey, I know that we just put in all these tool sets, but if I start triaging all these alerts right this second, we're not going to make any progress forward. But if I spend the next 6 months building everything out, at the 6-month mark, we will start looking at a broader set of issues. But I need to get these processes in place. I need to have these tools in place for us to even be able to manage that. And so I think a lot of people get into oh, I installed a tool. I absolutely need to do everything right now. Well, look at the bigger picture. How do we build this together? How do we bring everything all into one spot and really make it efficient? And so just because you get a sim and it starts lighting up like a Christmas tree doesn't necessarily mean that's all you can do or that's all where you should start just triaging immediately. You might decide that one or two things are very important there and that's all you look at for now. and then I'm building a bigger, a longer term strategy of, hey, I need this in place. This is building towards my strategy. Here's where we're going. And, that really helped me accelerate like the growth of the different teams, is really understanding that is sometimes you sacrifice that short term for those long term gains. And you just have to explain that to the management level pretty quickly because you're like, hey, look, here's what's going to happen. You're not happy with where this is at. And, we want to make this improvement. Here's what we're going to gain from it. In the short term, we're going to lose a little bit of this, but in the long term, we're going to gain efficiency, help our analysts develop faster, that sort of stuff. And so that's kind of really the things we focus on. Other things that we're kind of looking at now is a lot of AI SOC automation stuff. And everybody says AI, machine learning is part of AI, and that's been part of security for 10 plus years now. And so it's really interesting where we're at, but mainly we're not replacing people, we're making it just efficient because basically what I can do with AI is basically provide the data to my analysts and allow them to see all the data and have recommended searches. And here's all the results from those recommended searches. And here's how you handle it and that sort of piece. And that's really kind of the next frontier. And bringing all that data together simply for everyone really kind of elevates the team itself. And that's, okay, now somebody who's young that doesn't have a whole lot of experience, now when they get an alert from their EDR, now they get all the context around it from their firewall, from, the NDR, from your, all the different sources and kind of help tie that together. And that's really where the advantage is with kind of like the AI and the automation piece and making it to where somebody can make a very well informed decision just based off the data they're getting. And I always aim to be able to basically bring enough data into my alerting that with that data and the alerting, what we end up bringing in is enough data to be able to write a email summary. So like any critical alerts come in with like an email summary, but that email summary has all the details and enough details to make a decision. And that's what I aim for. Like, I'm like, okay, I really want to give all the data information. So let's enrich all this, bring it together. And then that way the goal is to make that decision off that little set of data you get in front of you with all the decisions behind it checked off. And, hey, how did it get here? That sort of thing. What did it look at? How did it get here? What's its confidence level that it's correct? That sort of thing. And so, there's a lot of products coming out soon, a lot of products coming out still in this space.
Very noisy space, I can tell you that.
And it's definitely noisy. There's definitely a few really good companies out there, though. It's going to be sifting through that noise over the next 6 months to a year to figure out what the right approach is long term. But that's really kind of, that's the next frontier is really to take the SOC to that next level and really bring that enrichment and make it simpler so that people of all skill levels can learn. And then basically, if somebody at a senior level starts doing searches that are different than everybody else, hey, there's these new searches, by the way, and it would work with this type of event and kind of really bringing that together. And so it really helps kind of bring that tribal knowledge together. And that's really the important part because as you churn your SOC or you churn people in your security team, you lose that tribal knowledge. And so you really want to have as much of that together as you can. That way, no matter what happens when somebody else comes in or has to come in, it's there. Or, if an IR team comes in because something really bad happens, having all that tribal knowledge there for the IR team is super helpful when getting your company put back together once everything has gone to full on shutdown mode. And that's really where we want to avoid is being in that full shutdown mode.
Yeah, and there's so much to unpack in what you've just covered, right? People are looking at AI in all different ways. For us, it's a matter of a drop zone. It's a matter of we're augmenting, we're not replacing, and taking care of the things to your point that can be kind of automate it, right? But still have a human in the loop in terms of your team. There's a lot of contention from what we're hearing on, whether or not that's replacing the entry level roles or if it's helping those entry level folks. So it's interesting how you're thinking through that, as well as, what happens when people leave the team? Are you stuck? Do you need to, what's the ramp up time and how much can an AI enable you to catch up? And then flip side from a marketing world where we have 50 plus market competitors, 5, 10 direct competitors, it boils down to everyone says the same thing, right, on their website and what have you, and how can we make your lives easier? And then not trying to have smoke and mirrors where it's the, "Oh, we can automate your sock." No, we can't. We can automate pieces, right? But we're certainly not at a spot where we can just say, "We'll do all this for you," and you're hands off sitting at the beach. And whatever vendor says that, obviously, it's kind of suspicious.
Yeah, there is a lot of smoke and mirrors in some of the AI space. That's why I really like to see, like, when I see this stuff, how did they come to the decision, things they looked at, and it kind of bring it out a black box world and more into the gray box. It's kind of what, you know, and it's never going to be perfect, but you have to accept that. I mean, we've had tools that are super loud over the years, and so you have all these false positives. You have stuff that is, super quiet and only, misses some things, and so you get your false negatives, and so it's really finding that nice balance. But I really see the younger generation benefiting from it because it's bringing in the information. Now you can say, hey, you know, here's the information. Here, you got an alert on this. Here's the background on this device. By the way, ServiceNow ticket was opened over here. By the way, here's this other stuff. Here's the IP address. Here's the owner of the machine. Here's who's last logged in. All sorts of things you can do with that. And you bring that right up to the analyst itself. And that's really augmenting the analyst and not replacing the analyst.
Exactly, just saving them the legwork. They'd still be trying to make the connections now they can say, "Okay, what else do I need?" Right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I kind of see a lot of that space, and a lot of the space as I'm walking somebody through that's been an intern with me and now brought on full time, and we've gone from the walk, crawl, run, and she's running now, and it's really cool to see that. And really, part of my job as a leader is to develop my team, and so I make sure I spend the time with people and give them the feedback, and I expect my team to fail, but the only time you truly fail is if you fail to learn. And so I always make sure that, hey, it's fine if there's a mistake, if there's something, tell me about it. We'll fix it and we'll learn from it and make ourselves better. And so, you know, I've always taken that approach. And if my team messes up, it's my problem. And it's, I want them to grow. And if they feel safe, they grow really fast because, hey, I I know that I have the support, and if something goes wrong, somebody that is going to actually say, "Hey, here's what's up. Here's what we learned. Here's something we can do to mitigate this in the future." And so, that's really kind of the mindset that we have with my team.
Which is great. I was going to bring up the important keyword you said was "we" failed, not "you failed," right? It makes all the difference because then it allows your team to grow in a safe environment and they know, okay, failures are expected, right? Because that's how you learn.
Yeah, and if you're not failing every once in a while, you're not really pushing your boundaries as far as what you can do because you're gonna run into space like anytime you're in the security space, you're gonna run into stuff you've not seen before. And that's the kind of stuff I really like. I like the stuff I haven't seen before. I like when I see something new and I'm like, oh, this is a cool new attack vector. Like, I like that stuff.
And I can tell by your expression.
It's always fun when that happens because I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like,
A new puzzle to solve.
yeah, puzzle to solve. And, it's fun because it's like, I know what the data set is, I know what we have, what we can see. And it's, the things that are well known are pretty well taken care of. The new stuff that's not well known, that's the stuff that tends to get around some of your tool sets. And so that's the stuff that's really cool for me to look at. Like, I'm like, okay, this is a new vector. I mean, go look at Chatty Spider, who's really leveraged using Teams and messaging as a help desk agent on Teams, and then leveraging over to Quick Assist. Because if you have Teams in your Microsoft environment, you probably are running Windows. And with Windows, you have Quick Assist. And if you haven't disabled it as a company, you're going to be in trouble because that person's now going to have direct connection into the company. So, one of the best things to do if you're not using Quick Assist in your support roles, block it in your environment completely because that's really one of the tactics that they really like to use. And so that's very much okay, they're going to get Quick Assist. And, we've had people have this happen before. And, we had Quick Assist blocked, we had a few others blocked. And by the third one that they got to, because the person goes, oh, go to Google, I forget what they call it, but Google Remote Desktop, I think it is, or something like that. And then the people on the other side said, "Do this," and then the person finally clicked in their brain that this is not right. This isn't our support team, and so you learn stuff like that. And the other thing that you have to really look at is limiting the communication inbound from other organizations. Really going through that on Teams and making sure that hey, vet the ones that you use all the time, allow those, and then do as needed for the other companies you need to talk to because there's just a lot more of that impersonation these days. And then writing sim rules around your team's environment, looking for people called help desk or help and other things in the environment. And so lots of things that you can do there to really kind of harden your environment and kind of take a lot of things away from it. But, really it's looking at the tactics, techniques, and then figuring out the best mitigating factors based on the tool set you have and what's available. And, what you might do today isn't necessarily going to be your long term solution. So you may be able to kind of do something today that's a countermeasure, but it isn't really the full solution. So longer term, that's when you can go, okay, we're going to need this and we have this issue. Let's get some funding and solve this.
So you've worked across consulting, oil and gas, and chemicals manufacturing. What is the security assumption that works in traditional IT environments but completely falls apart in operational technology and industrial settings?
I would say the biggest thing that happens there is basically the assumption that you need to be on the latest everything. A lot of times that breaks the industrial environments. And the other thing you have to be really careful of with the industrial environments is like a lot of your warranty is tied to whether your system is exactly the way they configured it. And so they may have a legacy malware protection tool that isn't up to your standard, but you can't put yours on there because if the system breaks, it's a multi-million dollar system and now you have no support for it.
Interesting. So you're between a rock and a hard place.
So you're between a rock and a hard place. And so, I think that that's one of the things. It's like, oh, I want to put my tools there. I really want to put my tools there and have it standardized across the environment. You know, that's really where in the past I've taken tools, NDR tools, and specifically Darktrace in the past, and really use that to see across the environment and go to the network side versus putting everything on the endpoint side and really working around that. But, that's why you segment out those OT, the IoT, and that sort of stuff. That's why you have to have it segmented out. And the more segmented out it is, the reason you do that is because in those environments, oh, they only can patch quarterly, they only patch every 6 months. There's updates, they have to be validated, they don't have all this other stuff. And so you really are very restrictive with what you can do into those different VLANs across different firewalls and that sort of thing.
Tough, tricky situations. So, how do you approach vulnerability management differently in operational technology environments compared to traditional IT systems?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the thing that we do, or the thing that's kind of different between operational and OT side, ICS side, basically we're monitoring for that kind of stuff on the OT side too. And we make sure that we have the risk registers for both sides and say, hey, this is a risk we can't mitigate because of this. Here's that, but here's all the other mitigating controls we have in place. Whereas, like on the regular IT side, we're really quick to patch. Oh, let's throw the patch on it. Cool. Well, great. Like, there's so many tools out there these days that we can patch pretty instantaneously. And so there's really that big time delay between when you can patch something for your IT environment versus an OT. And you have to just understand your OT environment, how restrictive it is, what's normal, so that when something abnormal happens, you actually can figure out what it is. And so, really having to get that understanding of the environment is really the key difference because, you know, in the IT space, okay, cool, let's patch it, let's move on. We've got a procedure, here's that. We're not impacting multi-million dollar control systems that are doing all sorts of different things in chemical processing or oil and gas. And, so you go from having all these crazy restrictions that you can do and versus you can't. So really the main difference for me is just, you know, having that really restrictive network rule set around it, understanding what's normal, and being very sensitive if one of those tools triggers for a particular way for your entry path into the environment. And so it's everybody wants to have access to print new stuff, but sometimes you may say, hey, you can't print out of here, or it only comes out but doesn't go in, and maybe we're pulling the data from a span port and not necessarily directly off a device or something like that. And so it's really just being more meticulous about how, when, why we're doing something, and really focusing on doing the stuff that makes the biggest impact. And the patching windows are small, they're very infrequent. So you have to be on your game with that as to kind of what you're doing. You definitely have to have your OT team on board because they've got to have a good plan around it because they're going to be the ones who are impacted when the automation and everything else doesn't work on that. So you have to really make sure that they're fully involved with that. And so that's really the challenge, right? Is you've got to have a lot more people on board, ready to new hands on, because if you mess up the OT space, the production stuff and the OT space, you're stopping money flowing in the company. And so you need to have everybody kind of on standby that could help in those situations if it ends up there.
During that ransomware attack, I have to go back to that and ask you, what's the one thing you learned from that experience that changed your approach to security?
The one thing that really changed from that experience was really for me was seeing how impactful it could be to a business because up until that point it was a lot of just malware and that was it. Well, when somebody gets into a company undetected for 6+ months, corrupts all of the backups, everything else, and now you have a 4,000 person company, lots of servers, no endpoint protection, that sort of thing. You really learn what's important pretty quick. You go put a EDR tool in place and it lights up like a Christmas tree, and you turn on your vulnerability management for the first time and you see 10 million plus vulnerabilities in the environment because things haven't been patched in 5+ years and they haven't had endpoint. And so it's really keeping up with the hygiene is very important. Making sure that you have visibility is extremely important because even if your tools don't stop it, you need the visibility to figure out what's happening and being able to detect it, because if you can't see it, you can't stop it. And so really, the lesson I take away from that event is basically they didn't see it until they literally had ransomware screens across the entire environment. The other thing is that I've learned over the years is the threat actors tend to like holidays. And so it's always interesting because anytime I've seen a major incident, a lot of the major incidents that I've done, like consulting wise and stuff, all fall around like holiday time, Christmas time, the day after Christmas, Thanksgiving. They look for those holidays because what they're looking to do is to have the least number of eyes on screen and then leverage that. to make the most impact. And so, that was the thing is like we were more than 6 months after the initial attack happened that they actually did the ransomware. So they waited, they learned everything they could about the company. They took as much as they could and then ransomware the whole place once I knew what was going on with it. And they did it on like holiday. So, and I've seen that a few times now with different companies. And, it's always interesting. I'm like, okay, so I'm hyper aware around this holiday season. Things start popping. I'm really looking at things closely and going, okay, what else could possibly be going on here? And so, those nights that you're working the sock and it's a holiday, you're so much more important on those days because those are the days that are fewer people are there to look and see what's happening. And so that really is when the analyst is really the most valuable right there is because they're there when everything's happening, paying attention to the screen. And so, you know, that it's going to happen around the holiday most likely. So, and that's going to typically be when the SOC is least staffed because people are trying to take vacations and that sort of stuff. So, really, your importance when you're there is super important on those holidays.
Which is interesting because marketers double down the whole phishing campaigns throughout the holidays, Black Friday, what have you, but you guys all know it's crunch time then, right? The rest isn't thinking about it. Does AI help you there as well in terms of detecting things faster?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is some AI elements to it. As we add more and more stuff, there's more AI stuff that's kind of pulling things together. Really, kind of the advancement over the years has been that it's getting better at correlating events and tying multiple events together to really put a storyline there. And so that's really helpful in stopping stuff sooner because now I have context around, okay, it's not just this alert, but here's everything that happened before the alert, here's everything that happened just after the alert and really driving that context. So, the AI does definitely help. The machine learning stuff that I've been using over the years is super helpful. And if you're not using AI and machine learning some way in your security stack, that you're behind the eight ball because the other side is evolving. We're seeing phishing attacks that are AI generated, and every single email is customized to that person, and it comes from a different email address. And
It looks too perfect now. You can't find mistakes anymore, right?
right, and so it's learning what's normal, learning what's going on, and really having to trust a lot of the tools, and then when something doesn't get detected, figuring out why it didn't get detected and how to detect it in the future, and then that's the first step in mitigating it, because once we know what is there and what's happening, now we can build a mitigation strategy, mitigation plan around it and prevent something from happening in the future. But if you can't figure it out, you can't see it, it's really, really hard to figure out the rest of it.
Yeah. So when you're presenting security posture and opportunities to executive teams, what is your approach to make them care about the investment?
The one thing that I've been lucky and fortunate about is, I've always had a lot of support from my upper level. So my CEOs, CISOs, everybody that's been above me has always been very supportive of it. The companies that really have that safety culture is really, they're very much security oriented a lot of the times. And so I really like that space. It's really explaining that, hey, you know, if this phishing attack gets through and we don't have any phishing protection, the low end is somebody getting a invoice paid, and it could be $20,000. It could be $1,000,000 that somebody has missent somewhere. And my tool cost $50,000 a year. So, do you want to mitigate it for $50,000 a year, or do you want to risk having multi-million-dollar invoices not come in the door? Or the invoice comes in, but the money gets redirected somewhere else. And we see a lot of that attempting to happen, but, I really drive home what the consequences are of it. Like if it doesn't, or if you don't have endpoint protection and you get ransomware, what that looks like, you know, if you're down completely and you lose, 50 grand, 20 days of business, 2 weeks of business. The running joke though, I think, is that, when's the best time to get security tools after a breach?
Yeah, you have full buy-in. It's like, "Get whatever you need."
If you can get ahead of that, that's really where you want to be. Is you want to be funded beforehand. You want to have the tools there ready to go, protections in place and get ahead of the curve. Otherwise, you're going to be behind the curve. And so it's kind of a reality, but but that's why, like, anywhere, it's fighting for that budget. Really, hey, security is not, we're not doing security for fun. We're doing it to make sure that we can continue business in a normal manner and not impact revenue and be able to build that trust with our customers. Because going down for a ransomware event, then people are going, do we trust you for payment? Do we do this? When there's all sorts of things that start happening. And it's really projecting that you're there, you're ready, you can do it, and it really helps everybody else at that point. But, it's really getting that funding up front before a major incident happens. If you don't have the buy-in, you're not going to be successful. And, fortunately for me, every time I've ever, like, my last role, every time I had something I needed, I got it. Just had to tell them why, and I would get signed off on it. So, I was very, very fortunate in that state, being able to build exactly what I wanted, or, hey, this is happening, or we want, this happened. Can you do anything about it? Yeah, we can do something, but we need this. And that's the other thing, is if the upper management starts asking for something, say, well, we can do that if we have this. Not let me necessarily hodgepodge it together, have a half baked solution. Well, maybe we can buy something with it. And so I like to turn that conversation to, hey, we could do this effectively with enterprise grade technology if we have this. And this is about where it costs. So I think part of the whole leading a, like, security organization is really staying up to date with all the new tools, the new tech, everything that's coming down the pipe. Because as new challenges come up, as you face new challenges, you're going to need some sort of solution. So it's really important to go to those different conferences and see all the vendors, and not necessarily, you know, I like going to conferences just because, one, all the people there networking, but two, you can walk up to a vendor, get a 5 minute conversation, not have an hour phone call with them just to get to the point that, oh, this isn't going to work for what I want. Or, hey, what are you guys doing differently than everybody else? Is my favorite question to ask to vendors. So, usually the first thing I ask is, what are you doing differently? And then that throws them off a lot of times.
Oh, yeah, especially in this space, because everyone has we're really transparent, but the rest doesn't put much out there other than what they put on their website, so it's been a curveball for our teams as well, at least in the beginning.
Yeah. And so it's always a challenge. It's always one of those questions that's hard to get around, but it's very much, it tells me that, when I ask a vendor that and I get an answer, it tells me how plugged in they are to knowing the whole space, not just their products, but how everything else is playing together. And so there's just way more to it than just that. But that one question really brings out a lot of that stuff.
I would love to have, from a shameless marketing perspective, I would love to have a scorecard, kind of like on the soccer field, of red flag, yellow flag, green flag of how did you do with that question? That would be so helpful to teams. People like red.
Yeah. Pretty soon they'll have something for that, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Cool. Could talk to you all day, but the question from the last guest, Robert Kiefer, who's the Associate Director of Security Operations at the Pew Charitable Trust, left you with this. He said, I have recently become very interested in not just team development, but legacy development. So I think what I would be really interested in hearing from you, Joe, is what are you doing to identify and train the person who's going to take the role after you?
Yeah. I mean, that's always the crux of it, right? You're literally in the middle of trying to figure out who you're bringing on or who's going to succeed you and that sort of piece. But succession planning is very, very important. You never know what's going to happen in your life. Things change, you know, plan for the unexpected. and, hope for the best for everything is kind of the approach I've taken. But, for me, what I like to see is I like to see people that have a lot of curiosity. I want to see them ask questions or why and really how that goes. And so for me, I'm looking for the things I can't train. I can't train curiosity. So if they have curiosity, a little bit of technical skill, I can do a lot with that.
And excitement like you when talking about these threats versus like, "Ooh."
Yeah, and it's crazy because it's like, okay, cool. Like there's, everybody sees all the technical stuff. I'm like, well, if you're not curious, you're not going to ask the question when you see something about why, how, and dig into that data. And so that really becomes the determining factor a lot of times for who's going to be successful is the person that is curious and asking questions because that person is learning actively. And that's really what I'm looking for a lot of times is that person that wants to actively learn. I will spend all the time with my team as they need, basically if they've got certain things, I do weekly meetings with most of them. And, basically I'll spend an hour or 2 hours a week giving them personalized instructions around different things that they want to learn and really share the knowledge and then, really identify who's picking up, who wants to actually manage a group, that sort of thing. But when I do hire, I do look to hire somebody that I could see taking my role in the future. And so that's what I'm looking for is that curiosity. And once I know they have the curiosity, a little bit of technical experience, especially around networking, is super helpful with that. And so the most success I've had is people that are curious and have some networking experience I've been able to turn into really a lot of good roles for them in the future. And, the best part about it is seeing people succeed. And, you know, I go back to, I've got people on my team that, 6 months ago I would have never expected to be where they're at. And, from a sim standpoint, they didn't really do a lot of query language. And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, they're writing 200 lines of code in query language and have all these searches, which is beyond what I can do now. And like I get a lot of the joy from that. And that's somebody who's growing and going to be able to do something in the future. There's a good opportunity there, right? And so that's kind of the stuff that I grow with. And the other thing that I kind of look for is, when you first enter a team, don't necessarily take everybody's take on somebody as exactly that because basically, you walk into a team and what I've found a lot of success is basically you'll walk into a team and they'll be like, "Oh, they haven't performed well in a few years and we're not sure what to do." And if you tell people they're doing a bad job, they will do a bad job.
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah, so give them a little encouragement, give them that spark, and it goes a long way. And I think that that is way, way, way underrated. So people come into teams and don't realize what they have. It's just a diamond in the rough. Somebody just did the time with the person. If you believe they can learn, they have the ability to learn and they have the curiosity, I can teach them. And so as long as they're teachable, they're good. And we can make a really good analyst out of them. We can make an engineer out of them and really progress their career. And so that's really, what we're looking at. But, don't walk in and say, okay, just because this person had bad reviews over the last few years doesn't necessarily mean that's them. Maybe you need to bump them up a little bit on the review, tell them they're doing a good job, give them the highlights of where they're going well, and then, encourage them, hey, I want to see more of this next year. That has really benefited me in my career with growing people and pulling teams together because once you start pulling teams together like that, then they get confidence and then they see people growing in the team and then others kind of join in with it. And it really has been a big success for me.
For sure. I mean, I always like to say you're only as good as your team, right? So you have to invest in your team, and without your team, you're nothing. And I think you just gave us the perfect example of what it means to be curious. You come into a role and instead of taking what's there and everyone's feedback, you say, let me be curious and learn about these people first and see how I can enable them, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. It is your turn to leave a cliffhanger for the next guest. What would you like to ask them?
So many things to think about. I think one of the questions that everybody has to answer is how do they plan on evolving their SOC as an organization? You know, because what we did 10 years ago is not what we're going today. So, what is their plan to evolve their SOC and their security operations?
That's a good one. Can't wait to see what we get for answers. We'll have to share with you.
Yeah, that one will be interesting. I can't wait to see it.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, Joe.
Thanks, Ann. Have a great one.
And thank you to all of our guests.